we doing? How we doing? You know, you're at a comedy club, you're paying somebody to make you laugh. You must be doing okay. You're not in the hospital, your family's not in the hospital, and if they are, at least you're paying somebody to make you laugh, make you forget about the temporary inconvenience of having a relative in the hospital. Now, if I fail to do my job, then you'll be back to square one. Larry David couldn't be here today. His enthusiasm had been curbed more than originally thought. That was a joke. Why would Larry David be here? He has other things to do. I'm not afraid of the controversial topics of religion, politics, and OnlyFans. My recommendation would be just avoid the ones that you spend $1,000 from the new MasterCard that you just got in the mail in one day. Just stay away from that one. Because if your church is taking MasterCards, your pastor might get audited by the IRS, which I hear is not pleasant, especially when the money is supposed to be going to things like, AIDS, HIV. What is money going to do for AIDS and HIV? Oh, that's right. There's that guy in the NBA, Magic Johnson. I had a PET scan done recently, not to be confused, of course, with the domesticated companion animal scan. And when you go into a PET scan, they play music, while you're in there, because it takes about, anywhere from 35 to, 55 minutes, let's say. It could take an hour. And the gentleman before me, he had this song playing. And this song he had on was Spirit in the Sky by Norm Greenbaum. Now, if I'm in there getting a PET scan and I hear that song, you might have heard the song. It's like, when I die, I'm gonna go up in the spirit in the sky. I got a friend named Jesus. You may have heard of it. But if I'm in there and I hear that song, I'm like, these radiologists and radiographers and radio heads, Tom York's over here, these people are trying to tell me something. Lord, damn, look at that. That boy got it all over. Oh, he's a goner for sure. And, but I'd like to think that, that guy got a clean report, and then he maybe he got married, and as the recessional, maybe they played a Last Resort by Papa Roach, cut my life into pieces, this is my last resort, which would more aptly be called, of course, a depressional. But, some people, if they expect the worst possible thing and something slightly, marginally good happens, it's almost like, a little victory. People think a lot about death because they don't have the will to live. Well, why do you need a will when you're dead if you have will to live? Does that mean you have a will to die? Or does that mean that, you just transfer it over to someone else? But, one thing we say when someone dies is, the late. That's a little cruel. If somebody doesn't show up to work, let's say, it's 8:01, Rick's not at work, Rick's not in the office, and we're like, where the fuck is Rick? He's late. What is that? Why is he late? He's delayed, he's late. He died. Which is also, we can also say that of late night comedy now. It kind of has that same connotation there. My brother, he went to a dermatologist as a child, and that was really his first pop icon, because a dermatologist would see, those things on his face, pop, pop, pop. I don't think he got his autograph, but the guy left a really good impression. When I went to the dermatologist, I brought a book with me, just to sit there, have something to look at, trying not to look like I'm just addicted to my phone like everybody else, like I really am, because, that's how our brains are wired. We want to have things now, 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 now. We want to know what's going on with some guy we haven't seen in 5 years. We want to, make sure he's not doing better than us. But anyways, the dermatologist looked at my book and she said, I'm sorry. I'm like, what? Is the melanoma back? She said, "Oh no, that's not back. But I'm gonna have to remove that bookmark. You know, that thing can move from, it might be in one crease one day, and then it might, move 3 or 4, pages over. We gotta get rid of that. And I'm like, are you just doing that so you can charge me more?" She's like, "Yeah, insurance will cover it, but you know what insurance won't cover is that domesticated companion animal scan, not to be confused with the PET scan." When I got the PET scan, I didn't tell you the results, but what they found was NED, no evidence of dollars. So as a result, of course, I got sent over to the collection agency. Why are they called a collection agency? Because isn't that the same thing they call those little like wooden plate things in church? When they walk down the aisle and you kind of look at your hands, and you're like, he ain't gonna get me this time. He's not gonna get me this time. No, I know what that pastor's doing with his money. He's using it to pay off that MasterCard on OnlyFans. I remember before, HVAC, before air heating and air, there was OnlyFans. I actually don't remember that, but I do know what a fan is. You know, it's one of those things that, spins around and around and around and around, which is also, what guys watch when they get on OnlyFans. They want to see, things spinning, spinning around, and then they start, getting a little bit dizzy from all that, then, when they get up the next day, all their money, is gone. They had to, tell the bank 3 or 4 times, that this is not fraud. And, it actually would be better if it was fraud, because, you could be doing a lot of other things. Instead of watching OnlyFans, you could be, sitting in your chair, thinking about, how much better your life would be if you had that money that you spent on OnlyFans. A lot of people, there's a lot of people in the world, some of them are all right, some of them are not so all right. But I've noticed one thing about people. Some people, they're going to be curious about your presence, about when you're there, but they're, like, oh, this is a pretty cool guy. But then some people, you're just kind of there. You're like a piece of comfort, a piece of familiarity. But, if something happened to you, they'd be like, oh, he was so great. That really makes me mad. Like, if something happened to me, I want to, know who's saying this shit. Because I'm like, I didn't give a fuck about them, and they didn't give a fuck about me. It's kind of like, if you see some guy that you went to high school with 10 years ago, and, he's like, hey, how's it going, man? What's going on? And you're like, I can't believe I spent all this time, missing you. This is awful. Nostalgia is a terrible thing, because all those things that we miss, weren't really that good. Because the only thing we have is now. Is better. And something else. The only girl that I'm attracted to right now, she treats me with a high degree of respect. She treats me like I'm the only person who's not in the room. One thing that an alcoholic shouldn't do. An alcoholic should not drive on the road to recovery. Imagine that. You get pulled over, by the state trooper, highway patrol, and he says, they always say, license, registration, where you going, where you coming from, and you say, oh, I'm coming from, I'm coming from the beer garden. I'm not gonna lie to you, sir. I don't have a couple of drinks. And he's like, well, where you going? I'm like, I'm on the road to recovery. And he's like, sir, this is Highway 56 West. I'm going to ask you to step out of the vehicle. And, this might not be a very pleasant night for you, but, it's going to be a good night for the government, because I'll be goddamn if they don't get theirs. They're going to get their money. They're going to stretch it out. They're going to slap you around. and you're going to be miserable. But the good news is, you're on the road to recovery. So I'm very proud of you. Thank you.